Hello, viewers and listeners. How are y'all? Hope you all are doing great. Uh, I am amazing. Thank you for asking. So, in this episode of my podcast, my guest is a longtime friend who is Caleb Crutchfield. Caleb is a father of three young boys and an entrepreneur who operates a non-profit called as Collaborate Good. Collaborate Good engages in connecting people with one another through the medium of conversations. Find the idea behind his nonprofit really interesting, and I personally feel that conversations are a really powerful medium, and hence I operate this podcast. And I have known Caleb for almost 2.5 years now. I met him in one of his Conversation Matters platform, and he's a really friendly and great guy, and got to know him and like him immediately, and I've known him ever since. So Caleb's primary education and vocation has been as a Christian pastor, and he's very close to his faith. In our podcast today, we talk about his nonprofit, Caleb's background growing up, his beliefs in Christianity, and about working in a co working environment. I hope you all like this podcast. All right. Hello, Caleb, and welcome to the Kohli Show.
Hey,
Just
Avik.
how are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. So, how are you the nicest person ever? I want to know that.
Oh, that's too funny. I like people. I like smiling. I like having a good time. And yet I'm not the nicest person all the time. My wife will give her own personal testimony to the times where I'm not very nice. But I think where we've interacted the most, Avik, yeah, I'm looking to make friends. I'm looking to connect people, which are things I love doing, and so that's why I come across as really nice.
Cool. No, I just want to
Mhm.
mention that before we head into our podcast that I met a lot of people. But, Caleb is someone who's always in a good mood, which is
Mhm.
hard, for anyone to be in.
Yeah.
And Caleb's always happy to help me whenever I need something. So, thank you. And Caleb, we over the time of knowing each other have had a lot of conversations,
Yeah.
in-depth conversations about life, philosophy,
Mhm.
and I really enjoy those conversations with you. So I think you'd be a good fit for our podcast.
I
All
love
right.
it. I'm honored. I'm excited to jump in because I love these conversations too.
Cool. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? So where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? And all
That's
that good
great.
stuff.
Well, I appreciate it. I grew up in central Oklahoma, a small town called Choctaw, Oklahoma, just east of Oklahoma City, and had a really great upbringing. My parents were just blue collar workers. My dad's a retired firefighter with the Oklahoma City Fire Department. My mom worked for the electric company in Oklahoma, and I had two older sisters. And yet, um, I'm grateful for my dad and my grandparents that live nearby and uncles because they kind of rescued me from being surrounded by women only. I do greatly appreciate my mom and my sisters, but I'm glad I got to do some guy things growing up, working outside, doing construction stuff with my dad and my uncles, a lot of farming with my granddad. Um, Probably getting in a little too in depth there, but what's funny about my family connections are that they were fairly entrepreneurial, even though they were, um, more blue collar. They were always thinking about how to maximize time and effort and provide goods and services to people, both in the things that they did for themselves, but then they cared deeply about their communities. Um, I grew up as a Christian in that area, and so that worldview permeated the things that they wanted to be a part of. So their love for their neighbors, their love for their community, really came out of that Christian worldview of God's love and specifically His undeserved love for us. Motivated them and how they wanted to spend their time and their resources. So they just taught me how to work hard, how to be a helper. I pass that on to my boys too, that I want them to be a good helper to our family, but also to their teachers and their classmates. And that comes out of our worldview too. I ended up going to university at a Christian university, Oklahoma Baptist University, and then I went to a master's program in theology in Fort Worth. So I was in Fort Worth for 5 years, and I met my wife while there. We got married in 2008, and then we moved to Dallas, and we've been married for the last 14 years. We have 3 young boys, 10, 8, and 6. We live in Richardson, Texas now, so just north of Dallas. And I think, I guess one of the things that makes me so happy all the time is just being grateful for what I have. I work with a nonprofit, so we're not getting rich off this thing, but I love engaging in meaningful conversations. I love helping others think through meaningful topics and to engage with those who have different beliefs and values on those things. And I think that enriches relationships, which again gives me another thing that I'm really grateful for, because I get to meet people like you, Avik, which I just value our friendship.
Thanks, Caleb. I do too, and I'm glad I did get to meet you. So, how long were you in Oklahoma before you moved out to Fort Worth?
So when I finished undergraduate school, I was 22, and I moved down, and I spent 5 years working on a graduate school degree that was only 3 years long. So I joke that I was milking that program for all it was worth, taking 5 years to finish a 3-year degree. But if I didn't take that long, I wouldn't have met my wife, who I met the last 2 years of my program. Yeah.
Excellent. So Choctaw, when people hear Choctaw, they think of the casino. Did you spend a lot of time? You spend a lot of time going to casinos when you were there?
No, that's really funny. So Oklahoma changed their laws around gambling after I had moved to the DFW area. And so that casino was not as prominent growing up. It wasn't even in existence until I moved down to Texas. So yes, Choctaw, Oklahoma has an interesting, a diverse history. Obviously, the 5 civilized Native American tribes that were pushed into the Oklahoma territory, and then giving away land in Oklahoma brought a lot of the poorest of immigrants. So I have an interesting mixture of Native American background, though you wouldn't guess it by the color, how white my skin is, but I've got a lot of Irish background as well, because they were some of the poorest immigrants that moved to Oklahoma. But I have more Cherokee in my line than I don't think I have any Choctaw Indian, but those are same Indian nation, very different cities.
Excellent. I did not know that until you mentioned it right now. Yeah. Cool. So you mentioned that you did construction for a little bit. How long was that?
That was really through junior high and high school, a little bit through college, with my dad and my uncles during the holidays, weekends at times. I worked throughout college, helping just pay for what I could. Some of that, most of that, just social life, but all the just basic necessities of car payments and gasoline costs is what I was doing with construction, mainly concrete construction, which is probably the hardest construction there is, because you're just dealing with a very heavy substance, and you got to push it around, get it in the right place, move pretty quickly before it sets and hardens. And so, but I'm really grateful for that. I learned so much, and it definitely helped me in my own home improvement projects. I can understand how things are put together. Willing to do that myself.
Excellent. So you did learn a lot from it, but I would assume that it wasn't an easy job to do,
Oh,
lifting all that heavy stuff.
it was really difficult, but that was one of the other things that I learned from my family growing up was just a hard work mentality, working until the project's done, taking pride in doing good work for other people. Because again, they lived in the same community where they did a lot of that work, so they knew they're going to see these people a lot, so they had to uh, be people of character that they didn't have to worry about being seen by certain neighbors because they did shoddy workmanship. But yes, it was very difficult, especially during the summer times in Oklahoma. Just really hot, but learned a lot of how far my body could go, what could be accomplished when people work together. And yeah, I'm very grateful for that.
Cool. Let's talk about your master's degree,
Yeah.
right? Which you took 5 years to complete. So, for our listeners who are not aware of what a master's in theology is, how would you
Yeah.
describe it?
Yes. So this master's in theology was from a conservative Christian university, Southern Baptist theologically, the Southern Baptist denomination of the Christian um, religion. And a theology master's, my program took me through a lot of historical theology from the Christian faith, biblical theology, which means what does the Bible say about these things and how do these themes work together in a cohesive way. A lot of biblical languages. So I took classes in the original biblical languages of Greek and Hebrew to read the Bible in its original language, and a lot of practical ministry classes as well, talking about how to love and serve people, how to invite them to consider the claims in the Bible, walk through what's called a discipleship process. People that follow Jesus are learning to both understand him, to know him, to love him, and to live like him, is what a disciple of Jesus is. So the program kind of focuses around that. Can I help make disciples of Jesus who also want to make disciples of Jesus, right? So people who want to multiply and share that same message. So that's what a theology master's does. It was about a 90-hour program, and I was interning with the church during that time as well. So trying to put the academic pieces of Christianity into practice in the way that I would serve in my capacity as an intern at a church, both the people of that church and then the community that surrounded it.
Cool. So why did you want to do a master's in theology?
Yeah, good question. You know, many Christians believe that they are made for God. They're made to know his love and to share his love with others. And when I was coming to my own personal faith in that as a high schooler, I realized that I wanted to do more of those things and help more people understand who God is. If the God of the Bible is true and real and has made himself known through the person of Jesus when we didn't deserve it, then I want other people to know about his undeserved love for us. I think that was compelling for me, and I wanted other people to know it. So I wanted to understand more of what the Bible had to say. I wanted to wrestle with my own questions that I had about the Bible. I still have questions about the Bible, but I found it more and more compelling as I put more time into it. And so, yeah, so I wanted to get a further education on the Bible, on understanding this person named Jesus, so that I could wrestle with my own big questions of life. Why are we here? What's the value of a human? What are the problems in the world? What are the solutions that are available? The Christian worldview has answers to that. Other worldviews have their own answers to that. And what I found was the Christian worldview was really compelling because it's based on that concept of God's love for us, not us trying to earn God's love, but that God has demonstrated his love to us through sending his son Jesus. And so that concept led me to want to get the education and then the practical experience through certain internships in Christian ministries is where that really played out. And then what I'm doing now, I don't know if we want to talk about that at this point, but that master's degree really did influence what I get to do now, which is not in a Christian setting. It's not in a church setting, but it's a place where I get to share the undeserved love of God with people that I work with. And it's that perspective that motivates me to invite more people to talk about the things they really care about, to talk about the things that are meaningful to them. And I get to offer up the things I think are compelling from my worldview. They get to offer up things they're compelled by from their worldview. We get to push on that and think about what makes the most sense cohesively, what makes the most sense within each individual topic as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Why don't you go ahead and tell everyone about what kind of work you do right now?
Yes. So the name of the organization is called Collaborate Good, right? So it's playing off that idea of drawing people together and to consider what is good within any area of life. And now this work is done primarily in the workplace within co-working environments. And co-working are those shared work environments where entrepreneurs, small to mid-sized startup teams can have flexible office space, but it's very community oriented. It's the locations where Avik and I have met are the ones that really attract common spaces for people to meet one another, to share the industry learnings in their businesses with one another, to share even resources, to say, hey, I use this person for my taxes or for my accounting, legal situation. This is a lawyer that I use for that kind of stuff. It's supposed to be a place for those entrepreneurs to share those resources. So Collaborate Good plays on that idea of collaboration within a co-working environment, but then also inviting deeper conversations about what is good. Like I said earlier, specifically when we think about what is good work, what is a good work environment? What is a good society? What are good individuals, right? What's a good person? What's good sexuality, right? We can invite conversations about those things and realize we do have boundaries because we identify what's outside of that boundary of good. And then, but thinking through that and pushing on each other, and inviting more conversations about those things. So there are topics that really center around decision making, because that connects to our beliefs and values about what is good in those situations, what we find meaningful or fulfilling, what's actually going to make us satisfied or happy at the end of all this work that we're doing. And so we invite those kinds of conversations through a member program that's called Conversation Matters. So Collaborate Good as an organization, its member program is called Conversation Matters. And it's just playing off that idea that certain matters deserve a conversation, but actually having the conversation matters. Can we talk with others about things we care about, even with those we might disagree with, right? So we're trying to connect people and values to everyday situations. I love connecting people to one another. I love connecting them to the values that are driving their everyday decisions, right? So this is where Avik and I have really had an opportunity to talk about these ideas that drive our decision-making, that ideas have consequences. They lead us in how we think. They lead us in how we talk and behave and act in those things. So we do a once-a-month luncheon at co-working spaces and invite them into deeper conversations about, what drives our decision making and how do we know when we're wrong? When is it okay to change our minds? Can we really live however we want to, as long as we don't harm anyone? So we're identifying topics like personal freedom, personal choices. How do loving relationships conflict with some of our ideas of freedom and autonomy? How do we even recognize when when we're wrong? Is it okay for people to disagree with us, especially those that we know care about us? Are we okay with disagreement, trying to make it okay that people can still disagree and still be friends, respectfully disagree as we try to live life with one another.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great introduction, Caleb. And to the listeners, yes, I did meet Caleb through one of his conversation matters. That was in the Deep Elm area, which was my very first co-working space. I guess another reason that we do come to co-working spaces is to go out and meet people and get to know more people and get to see what the outer world is like. Because in these
Yeah.
days, remote working just keeps you restricted to your house, your computer, which is not a great way to live life, in my opinion. Because you're not interacting with other humans, and uh, that is important for me. And another thing is that your program does create long-term friendships, as you know, you and I and other people that have met in your
Yeah.
program have become long-term friends with them. Yes, here, uh, and a lot of
Yeah.
folks. And I think a good basis of forming friendship is spending time together doing an activity. A lot of
Yeah.
people tend to spend time together to get drunk or, go to a bar. But, I guess having conversation too
Yeah.
is an activity which can form camaraderie between people.
Yeah.
So how did this whole thing start? How did you start Collaborate Good? What was the motivation behind it?
That's a good question. So, from some of my work background, coming from a Christian ministry background, but also having influences from my family on being entrepreneurial. I also had some eclectic work background through college, through my master's program, and then after our master's program, when my wife got married, I ended up working for an IT company and then for a recruiting company. And so that kind of experience just helps me appreciate both of those opportunities were with small businesses, obviously getting to work with my family in some of their small business ventures just helped me see the inner workings of that and what it takes. And so co-working spaces kind of resonated with me. And I worked with another organization that created discussion forums similar to what we produce, and yet they were very specifically about Christian faith tenets. So they allowed people to ask the hardest questions they could about Christianity, and it gave an honest place for Christians to respond to those questions and a lot of those objections, and help them see the reasoning of why Christians hold to those beliefs and what's compelling to them. I really valued that and resonated with that because it allowed for very honest conversations about different faith perspectives. And so I was trying to create that opportunity in a co-working space without it being specifically a Christian faith conversation, but saying, hey, having a space where people can talk about the things that they care about really does develop richer, deeper relationships. And it invites the conversations about the things we care about the most, which are usually connected to our belief systems. And whether we're religious or not, we all have a belief system, specifically, what is a good human life? That can't necessarily be proven scientifically, or it's not just a data only answer to that question. But everyone has beliefs about that. And if I can invite conversations there, I can help more people connect with one another about the things that they hold most dear. And that, I think, is more of a hopeful way for our society to connect when, the pandemic has just exacerbated some of the division that was already there. And when we're not around people with different perspectives, when we can choose not to be around them, we can often miss how to be kind with people that we disagree with, right? But it does. It allows for those it allows for the deeper relationships to take shape if the people are willing. And obviously, Avik, you've obviously been one of those friends that was willing. I think offering free food and making it as interesting and fun as possible helps, and it's at the workplace, so that's also easy. But it takes willing participants to say, hey, I want to show up to this thing. And as you've been through it a couple of times, you're like, oh, I really resonate with that. I want so-and-so to be involved in this, and I want to invite these other friends to be involved with that. And a lot of our earliest wins from the program, and one of our goals really, is that people start to connect outside of that 1 hour lunch. That's the whole point, is that they start to talk to each other beyond that lunch hour. And it really does create a stickiness, a more of a membership retention for the co-working space. But again, my whole view is that's a business side of it, which is good. But I care that people have significant relationships. That's still one of the number one workplace satisfaction issues, is that people have a significant relationship, someone where there's mutual respect and mutual care, that you care for them, they care for you, you respect them, they respect you. I mean, that most people will resonate. If they don't have that in the workplace, it's not nearly as fun. So we're trying to create those opportunities quicker by talking about the issues that are more meaningful, that are ones that permeate not just the business world, but our personal life as well, and tries to integrate our life and our thinking beyond just what we're doing task oriented for our jobs.
Cool. And I'm taking notes to further ask you questions about them. So, what is your ultimate goal? If you say there's like one ultimate goal that you want to achieve with Collaborate Good and Conversation Matters, what would it be?
Yeah. So our mission statement on our website is to connect people and values to everyday decisions. Now, in one sense, a goal is to connect people to one another, right? But it's also to help us evaluate the values, the ideas, the beliefs that then drive our decision making and are leading us down the path of a life that we find meaningful, satisfying, and so on, or free, whatever those ultimate values are that we're looking at. I'm trying to help people think through that more. One of the things we like to say in our discussion forum, which can raise some eyebrows, is not every perspective is equally valid. And some people kind of hesitate on that, but it's been interesting. A lot of people are like, yeah, absolutely. Which is why we want to talk about certain things, like when is it okay to change our minds, and what makes a perspective less valuable than another one, right? Because certain perspectives don't create the same outcomes, the same life, the same, and that doesn't just mean success in any material way, salary, titles, authority, and things of that nature. But certain perspectives about yourself and about others, especially those that are different than you, can really damage relationships, or really leave you in a place of self, that could lead to self-harm in some ways, because they lead to depressive ideas about yourself. So not every perspective is equally valid. For instance, we don't think in our society that women should be treated as property, or that even children should be treated as property. But there are other cultures and societies in the world that still hold to those beliefs and hold to that perspective. And so that's one way that we can, consider, hey, not all perspectives are equally valid. That doesn't create the society that we think is healthiest, is best for everyone that's in that society. So, but that takes some time to unpack, right? Who are we to tell another society they're wrong in the way that they view and treat women? Well, someone needs to be able to say, yes, we don't believe people should be enslaved. There's modern day human slavery right now, because cultures believe certain ethnicities or people groups, are not as valuable. And really, if they can get the power over those people, why shouldn't they? And who should tell them they shouldn't use their power to get the things that they want? So the people in power, or the people oppressed in power, you can't speak against that unless you have some good arguments for why those perspectives are not good. Now, arguing that is one thing, but inviting conversations for us to think through that in a society like ours might even be more productive, might help us think even more specifically about how we should be involved in some of those efforts of helping others in our society, but also maybe even helping those in other societies move towards a more meaningful and satisfying life. But how are we going to do that unless we start to think about it ourselves? Avik, I'd love to hear more of your perspective on, coming to the U.S., experiencing some of the success that you have in the U.S., the comforts, and thinking, in one way, we can kind of just numb ourselves out and go, well, I'm getting these things, I'm able to experience this stuff, but am I really living the life I thought I was going to experience when I was first coming to the US, where there's all this opportunity? That's just one example to say, if we don't think about the things that are meaningful and we don't talk about them with people that want to help us think through those, we might be missing out on some big things. So that was a long answer to fleshing out why we want to connect people to one another, but also connect them to the values that are driving them consciously or unconsciously. Those values are driving them in a path in their life. And if we can think about that early enough, we might be able to keep ourselves from wasting some time or from hurting ourselves or hurting others.
Cool. I have a follow-on question about what you just said. You said not every perspective is equally valid. And you did mention some things like slavery and treating women as property. But, I think at this point, the Constitution agrees with you to say that these things are not valid. It's just, agree that these are illegal. We can't be doing it. So is there anything that is still a perspective in the United States, which is legal, and people have that perspective, which you think is not valid, apart from, the things that you mentioned? Because those are like extreme things, and, not everyone resonates with it. Because not everyone who would be listening to the podcast would be like, no one would agree that slavery is a good thing or treating women and children like property is a good thing. But,
that's a good point. I mean, how many people live in China that, there's actual slavery in China right now? So there's over a billion, 1.8 billion. I can't remember the exact number of the population of China, but that's a lot of people that are, at least, we're not hearing anyone protest against the slavery that's happening there. There's other countries that still have women treated like property. And some of those countries have people who have immigrated to the US. And so that idea still permeates in our culture. The law says, yes, you can't treat them like property, but if that's happening in their household, that still might happen, right? So I think one of the issues that's most prominent in our society right now is this idea of expressive individualism. So a lot of the people that I follow and read are talking about that being the primary value within the culture, the US culture and Western cultures, which means you have the right to express yourself individually as much as you can in order to self-actualize, to actually become the person you should be. And if anyone disagrees with you, they are harming you. Even the disagreement of your self-expression can harm you. And I think that is the baseline foundation for a society, is really difficult. In our last conversation matters on, critiquing how we view freedom, I quoted from a guy named, a sociologist named Robert Bellah, who basically said most of the US society was formed by voluntarily unselfish behavior. So originally it was, what can we do to be good individuals that then build good communities and good societies and things of that nature, which means it costs us something to do something good for someone else. Now our society is saying, I don't care so much about other people's good. I care primarily about my own good, right? So that's a perspective that I think is not equally valid. Imagine, let's really play out a society that's bent towards individuals who only care about their self-actualization, and their only boundary to their self-expression is what harms someone. So instead of a guiding boundary of let me do what's good for others, the only boundary is, well, as long as I don't hurt anyone else. You're not actually thinking about the good of them. You're only thinking about what can I get away with. Do you see what I'm saying? That's one perspective that I think is not equally valid. You don't end up with the same society with those two different perspectives, right? And so what's going to lead a society to say, no, we need more unselfish behavior? And what's going to lead a society to say, no, what we need to do is care more about the individuals expressing themselves, whatever that is, whatever that looks like. Those are very different perspectives, very different incentives and motivations there. And it plays out in very different ways. And whenever you're talking about a society, you're talking about how people interact.
Cool. But the fact is that America is a very individualistic society at this point.
I agree. And I don't think that's a good thing, right? So I'm saying America has fallen into that trap of expressive individualism. So, and again, one of the underlying things there in that whole idea is if I can express myself sexually however I want, as long as I don't harm anyone, right? That is the baseline goal for the human experience, is that you can be sexual however you want to. Isn't that interesting? Like, I feel like that is one of the most tip of the spear ideas within our culture right now. And I'm saying that's not a good thing. If we say sexuality is the purpose of human existence, then we're leaving out a lot of people who aren't sexual because of their age. Either they're too young or they're too old, or people from all kinds of other physical hindrances and disabilities, that we're saying that they can't live a fully human life because they can't be sexual in the way that we defined it, right? Where there's so much more to the human life than just our sexuality, right? So not making that the baseline experience, I think, is a very different perspective. So I'm agreeing with you, Avik. America is a very individualistic, and I think to a negative degree, right? So you come from an Indian culture where social connections, family responsibility is much more highly valued. I actually really value that for most Eastern cultures. The individualism of the West has its place, but not at the detriment of the society. And again, those are perspectives. Like who says which one's right? That's what invites a really fun conversation. Because there's some things that of the Eastern view of society first that leaves out the individual, but then there's the blind spot of the Western idea that says it's only the individual, and the society just has to deal with whatever that individual wants. Well, that has its problems too.
Cool. Well, I am of the opinion that individuality is, it might not be best thing out there, but for an individual to really self-actualize, it is necessary. And self-actualization is a human need. Do you agree?
Help me with your definition of that. What do you mean by self-actualization?
So I would want to go back to that pyramid of human needs, right? Like there's safety, and then there's few things, and at the top there's self-actualization.
Self-actualization.
Yeah. So forgetting what exactly Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And self-actualization is at the very top. Self-actualization is the level after you have gained some self-esteem, then you're like, okay, now I'm gonna come to a stage where I'm gonna want to pursue my full potential, uh,
Mm-hmm.
pursue my full potential as well as express myself in the way
Mm-hmm.
that I feel I am here to express myself in, right? For you,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah.
collaborate good. For me, it's going to play basketball, this podcast, right? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if you do not self-actualize, you do feel unfulfilled. Would you agree?
Um, I would I would want to flesh out the self-actualization piece a little bit more, because in one sense, the danger that I'm thinking of is self-actualization is only about personal happiness, right? I don't think that's the only view there, but becoming like the best you, right? Becoming the most full, complete uh, person. I think that includes a lot of other people in your life, right? Where the Maslow's hierarchy can make it feel like you can only find that in your own self, um, and only after you have these other things met. So, for instance, Maslow's hierarchy, uh, from my perspective, it really leaves us with, well, the only people that can self actualize are people in very privileged societies that come from very privileged families, right? Because everyone else is trying to meet those basic needs to some degree, and somehow they can't self actualize. I think that's one of the dangers of the uh, expressive individualism view, is that um, if you don't have the freedom, the economic freedom, the freedom of time, you somehow can't spend more time on these intellectual ideas and concepts, or these hobbies that then really fulfill you, or the hobby that you don't really need to bring an income from because you're independently wealthy. Well, actually doing good things for other people, even if you're in a low socioeconomic situation, if you are doing good for other people, there's something beautiful about that that adds value to yourself and others. Now, the thing is, utilitarians would say, well, that's what we need to do. We need to maximize the greatest amount of good, and we need to incentivize people to do unselfish things for others, because why do they say that? They usually say that do unselfish things for others because it makes you feel good too. Well, I think that's a poor motivation. We're saying do unselfish things for selfish reasons. I think that that motivation just falls short. And again, some of the things that I read and I'm motivated by are the Christian teaching on the worldview, the way we view the world, humans, the problems that we face, the solutions that we have. And I'm really compelled by a lot of the historical examples of how Christianity is the reason why we have our whole view of human rights. It's like secular historians and secular philosophers all point back historically to the value of a human in a worldview concept came from the Judeo-Christian perspective, which is why Christians were the first to create orphanages and hospitals, and also the educational system with libraries and teaching in general, um, caring for the least in their neighborhoods. Now, many Christians have failed to live up to the Christian ideals. Like there's tons of examples we can give to that, but the historical foundings in so many of those things that say, I want to help others, I want to do good for other people, came from some of those historical examples. I think that's beautiful. It's compelling to me. And it comes from their beliefs about the value of a human, no matter their socioeconomic, ethnic background, their gender, their age, their physical capabilities. They are valuable because they're human. They're valuable because God made them in their image, in his image. God made humans in his image so that they could be in relationship with him. So every Christian is supposed to view another person as equal in value and dignity, and to care for them, even the least of these, and even their enemies, to care about them, to love them, even when they feel like they're an enemy. So that's hopefully that touched on the things you were asking.
It does. It does, but I think the definition that you have for self-actualization is it falls into a category of doing something with the motivation of pleasing oneself. Uh,
Okay.
but some people do self-actualize by doing charity, right? I
Yeah.
mean, uh, so is that a good or a bad thing? I mean, it is for the motivation of, seeing your efforts. I mean, in case of volunteering or, charity,
Yeah.
seeing your efforts bring good to other people does make you feel good. Now,
Yeah.
now that's not a bad thing if that is how someone wants to self-actualize, and if even if that's the motivation, I
Yeah.
think it's not a bad motivation to have. What do you think?
That's a really good perspective. I'm glad you brought that back and circled back on that idea because, in one sense, the Christian worldview says if we're made for God and we're made to do good things for others that bless them, that share love with them by material helping, right? Giving them food when they're hungry, giving them shelter when they need shelter, being a good neighbor, like loving my neighbor as myself, that is a good thing. And so if we feel good by doing the things that we're made for. Now, that's the Christian view, but people that aren't Christian can still see, I feel good about doing good things for other people when they need it. Now, here's an interesting question we should ask ourselves. If we stopped feeling good by doing those things, does that mean we should stop doing those things? Is our motivation for doing good for other people just the feeling that we get? Because here's, even as a Christian growing up, I had to bump into this concept myself and go, you know what? I can recognize when I'm doing good things for other people, when really I like to feel good about myself, or I like getting the praise that I get from that certain person. I get upset when someone doesn't appropriately show me the appreciation I think they should because of the good thing that I did for them, right? That shows an ugly part in me. And if I was doing it just for that person's response of gratefulness, of thankfulness, well, then that's an ugly and kind of twisted way to do that. And I'll often find myself disappointed if I give my time, if I give my money to certain things, certain people, individuals, organizations, good causes, but I felt empty. I'm probably not going to do that stuff anymore. But the Christian worldview says God loved us when we didn't deserve it through Jesus. That's the message. So I should love other people when they don't deserve it. So I'm not looking, from the Christian perspective, I'm not looking to do good things for other people simply to get something from them. I don't think that's even the concept of love. I think the concept of love, as I understand it from the Christian perspective, is giving good things, doing good things for the other person, even when it costs me something. Now, what's in it for me if I'm doing that? Well, it's first a motivation because God's love for us, it leads us to love other people, even when they don't deserve it. That's kind of the motivation I found the most compelling. And I find that people that see self-actualization in charity or good causes, that's a good thing. I don't want to knock that, but to say that is the your source of self-actualization, you should ask yourself some questions. What has happened when someone didn't show you the appreciation you wanted, or you felt like you deserved? Where did you go? Did that discourage you from doing those things that you already said were good? And if so, are we then again motivating ourselves to unselfish action through selfish reasons, selfish motivation? I don't think that's going to be a long-term, a self-sustaining thing that can take place. We might find ourselves becoming really cynical if we're doing those things for others simply for the response that we get.
Hmm. But I think you would be the minority in being someone who would still continue doing good things for others, even if it's not A, reciprocated, or B, valued, right? You need either
Hmm.
of these. You need the person to be like, hey, I value this. And B, also be like, hey, if when you need me, I'm going to come out and help you too. Uh, I would say 95% of the human population would expect that and would feel that it is natural thing to happen, right? Like, would you continue helping and supporting people who do not value it and or do not reciprocate it?
Well, that's a good question. So I'm thinking of historical examples where that had to happen, right? So William Wilberforce was a British parliamentarian who helped fight against the slave trade and slavery itself in Britain. It didn't benefit him or his society financially, economically at all, to give up slavery. Slavery was a backbone of their economy. They made a lot of money off of other people, literally treating them like property. So to think, why would I do this unselfish reason, knowing that, I can't get appreciation from all the slaves. I'm not doing this because it benefits me, really. He went through incredible persecutions and blackballing and terrible things, slanderous things during that whole movement and effort to fight against a cultural problem of treating people as property. It's unbelievable. When would you give up that fight? Right? How much do you have to go through? But it was tens of 20s of years. He didn't see it actually come to fruition until he almost died. It was really late in his life. But to think, am I willing to continue down this path I know is good, that's good for other people, right? That's the stuff we got to ask our questions for. We got to ask questions that help us really investigate the time we spend and the resources we use for what ends. And if it's only to get something back, we're going to miss out on some really incredible things that we could do for people that we'll never meet. We might never meet the people that we could impact with the good that we're involved with. But if I'm only doing that to get some sort of recognition, man, I'm really missing out.
Right. But that example that you gave, it's a great example, but it's for a society-wide issue, which would definitely benefit certain section of the people,
Yeah,
which is slaves in that example.
yeah.
And there's definitely some motivation behind doing good for others in that manner. But
Mhm.
my question was specifically an individual or a person, you encounter, you do good tasks for them, they're like, hey, thank you. And then they're like, you know, one, not reciprocating it,
Yeah, yeah,
B, not thankful for it by
yeah,
their demeanor, right?
totally.
They're just like,
Well,
they're just looking at you as someone who's just there to help them whenever you need them, and then
yeah,
go on to do their own things. I mean, there are people like that who exist. A
that's a great
lot of
point.
them.
That's a great point. Where you can feel used by other people, and you're like, well, I'm not going to continue giving you my time and especially my money if you're going to just treat me like you're a vending machine, right? I don't think that's loving to that person, to be honest. You don't want other people to treat other people that way, right? So being honest about the way that they're treating you is a loving thing to do. And Avik, I use a lot of examples from my children, my three boys, and I'm doing a lot for them that they're never going to recognize. They're never going to acknowledge. Just like I can't fully acknowledge and appreciate all that my parents did for me. And I only recognize that as I'm getting to parent my sons, right? So that is one individual example that says, man, I'm just going to stop being as kind of a dad as I am because my sons just aren't appreciating me the way that they should, right? There's not many parents that would really do that. And I think that's a beautiful way that humans are made, that we're going to love kids, our children, unconditionally. It takes a lot for us to really disown our children. It takes a whole lot. But most of the time, it allows us to it's a perfect example of someone loving when they don't when the recipient does not deserve it.
Right. But that's your children. And I think historically, my parents have been like that too. I'm going to be a parent like that too, hopefully, and not disown my children because they
Yeah.
upset me.
Yeah.
I was just talking about people who you don't know. Like, I will be honest here. I have been I'm a good dude, and I like being good because that's what I was taught growing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're like,
Mm-hmm.
be good with people, be nice to them, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's just fulfilling in its own self. But I
Mm-hmm.
do see that people tend to use the
Yep.
goodness
That's right.
in a way, and I have to put a line to it. So I do struggle with it. That hey, is it a weakness that I'm being nice to people,
Mm-hmm.
or because not everyone deserves for you to be nice to them
Yeah.
unless there's some established history that you have with them where there's a there's a camaraderie, there's a
Yep.
friendship, and there's a reciprocation.
Yep. And
um,
trust. Totally.
yeah, so I'm assuming that you might have gone through that yourself in
Oh
some
yeah.
sense.
Right. So, for instance, if we're thinking of a really practical example, the homeless population in Dallas has grown incredibly, right, in the last 2 years, and there's tent cities around the area, just around where you and I live. Though there's different parts of the metroplex, we still drive by probably a handful of tent cities just to get to the offices that we're at, right? Just because they're asking for money on the corner and we might drive by without giving any money, does that mean we're not loving that? We don't love that person? Does it mean we have to love that person only if we give them money? Right? There's people that I'll give my time to and I'll talk to about, hey, these are some resources that can really help you. And so you have to wrestle with, what does it mean to love your neighbor, to actually really, your question was, I'm a good person, right? I'm going to be kind to people. And you felt taken advantage of, or like people use you. I've definitely felt that myself. And I've come to a place of peace in knowing that loving that person doesn't always mean meeting their self-described needs, right? In one sense, if they're really hungry and really need shelter, I have resources to help them with that. And I do. I'll talk them through the places to go for that, for food and for shelter. And if it's just a meal, sometimes I'll buy them a meal. I don't always have time to have that extended conversation. And so for me as a Christian, I will pray for that person, and I will do what I can in the moments that I can, and I'll try to make some time as well. But I don't think loving people is the same practical notion, the same practical element. For instance, you and I, Avik, I even asked you, in the consultant world, y'all have, some great season and some lean seasons. And I'm always, when you're in between projects, I'm always like, hey, how are you doing? I want to know how much runway you have, because if you need something from me, I want you to know I'm a friend in that. And I'll let my friends in my network know, hey, I want to be part of your legitimate friend network and social safety net as a friend. So keep me aware of the needs in your life. And I think if a society was bent on that, even if you didn't appreciate it, like I want to be a part of some of those things. I think you do appreciate it, but we both appreciate our friendship here. But I think about that specific example as someone on the street. And I've been asked by the same person multiple times for things when I've been kind to them in the past. And I'm okay to say, hey, man, I don't have cash for that today. And hey, remember, how can I really help you? And do you think helping yourself would be getting out of the situation? And I've been very disappointed that at times they're like, no, I like living freely on my own here rather than going to a shelter or going through a rehab process that could get me on my feet and get me working for themselves. That's what they've chosen. And for that person, I'm like, I will help you when you want to get out of this situation. Because I could really help some people get out of their situation if they want to, right? But that doesn't mean I have to obligate myself to continue to enable some of the really bad habits that's not good for them or good for society.
Right. No, for sure. And uh, I do get that example, what you're trying to say. Like, for example, you're helping a friend out with money
Mhm,
when he doesn't have a
mhm.
job, but he might have a gambling problem that you don't know about, and you're
That's right.
you're
That's
enabling him
right.
in gambling addiction.
Yeah,
It's tricky. It's tricky.
it can be.
But
Yeah.
but um, my question is more about the idea of living life to serve others.
Yeah.
Can be hard to consistently live with that idea because there are people lining out there to take advantage of your niceness, right? And that's the truth.
That's true. Yeah.
That's the truth. So I struggle with that myself, and I was like, what is your idea on that?
Well,
And
let's dig
how
on
to
that just a little bit more. I know we're running out of time here, but when you think about a motivation to be good in that way, alternative from the Christian perspective that says you are loved by God unconditionally, you are loved by God when you didn't deserve it, so you should love others when you don't deserve it. What's the alternative? Why else should you be kind to people,
you should
especially
be
if they're a jerk?
yeah, you should be kind to people who deserve your niceness and who won't take advantage of it,
Mhm.
right? Like, if I know that I'm helping this person out, and well, yeah, I think what comes behind it is certain kind of expectations, right? And those
Mhm.
expectations are not met. You're unhappy. But I guess what you're trying to say is that we should not have those expectations when helping people out. So
Well, and not fully. I mean, I think having certain expectations is not bad, but like making them your ultimate driver for why you do that will, it's led me to be disappointed often. So I'm asking the question for you to say, hey, if it's not the undeserved love of God motivating you, I want to know the other motivations for other people. So for instance, one of the compelling things that Jesus offers, and man, it hits me in the face. It's hard for me to wrestle with, to be honest. But he says you should love your enemies, love your neighbor as yourself, and even love your enemies. And I'm like, you know what? What can turn someone from an enemy into a friend is actually loving them when they don't deserve it. I know I felt that from certain personal relationships. I've even felt that in my marriage. So when you tell me, you describe me as really nice. My wife has felt it personally when I'm not nice, and for her to love me, even though I might feel like an enemy in that moment, changes my heart. It doesn't always happen immediately, but her kindness to me when I am ugly changes my heart and can turn me back into her friend and her husband rather than her enemy in that situation. Now, again, certain times and context demands a different type of love in that situation, but um, man, to love someone when they don't deserve it, I found that a world-changing concept. And the only way that I would be motivated to do that, even when I'm rejected over and over again, and I never see any results, is if I know for sure that I am loved by someone that I deeply respect. And that's the Christian perspective. It says that God loves us so much, he poured out his treasure. His only son is his greatest treasure, and he poured out his treasure to show us his love. And he also protected us from the punishment we deserved from rebelling against his loving relationship, which is what sin is called. But if he did that for us, I mean, that's a very compelling motivation to me. Even when I experience rejection from others, the feeling of hostility and enmity, to know that I am loved actually motivates me to love them in that moment. Because I was once an enemy of God when I was a rebel against him, right? Anyway, that's just a thought. As practical as I can get to it from those situations, that's what and so I'm always interested in the motivation of others, because someone like you, Avik, you're a deep thinker. You care about living a good life. You want to do good things. I know you grew up as a Hindu, but you've also been exposed to a lot of other worldviews and other societies. You're like, hey, I'm attracted by that concept. I'm trying to fit this together from the things that you have. And so I was just really interested in the motivation that you have in those moments. So thanks for leaning in.
yeah, absolutely. I did grow up as a Hindu, but I do not agree with everything that Hinduism says. In fact, I've researched a lot about all religions, and I've loved a lot of things that they say,
Mhm.
but not completely agreed with.
Yeah.
But what every religion says. That is, well, that is in a way me expressing my individuality, right? Like
Yeah.
me having my own frame of good and bad, and agreeing and disagreeing with something. And that's why I feel individuality is kind of important,
Hmm.
because there's two ways to live life, right? There's one way where you do things where you have this internal feeling that I think this is right, I'm going to
Hmm.
do it because
Hmm.
there's this thing inside of me which says you should do it.
Yeah.
I'm mostly wrong, sometimes right, you know.
That's a
But
great acknowledgement. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it is. And mostly wrong about whatever internal says. But whenever I'm wrong, there's a great lesson,
Yeah.
which helps me uh, fix my compass and be like,
Yeah.
hey, this, you've tried it before, it's wrong, don't do it.
Yeah. Totally.
Uh, and I think that is a good way to actually self-actualize yourself by following your instincts, as long as you're not harming anyone.
Hmm.
Learning, are your
Hmm.
instincts right or not,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then fixing yourself to adjust to, because there's some things which are good in the short term, right? Like,
Yeah.
all right, I'm gonna go get that drink, it's gonna feel nice right now, but tomorrow I'm gonna get that hangover,
Yeah.
which is nasty,
Yeah.
worse than how I felt yesterday before I got that drink.
Before I got the drink. Exactly.
Exactly. So
That's too funny.
yeah, so
Well,
that's how I've learned from my individuality. So
and I think
what
that's
is
good.
your
I value that, right? A personal experience is a big thing, and is obviously one of our biggest learning opportunities is that experience ourselves. But imagine this: imagine we both have this friend who we deeply admire and respect. They live a very wonderful life, like attractive life, and we find that when we bring our business problems to them, our personal problems to them, they give us really good advice. And the times that we go with our gut instead of their advice, we find like, man, I really should have listened to that person. And we've gone through that so much that we're like, why don't I just listen to this person all the time? Right? This person obviously cares about me so much that they're going to give me the time. They want me to know how things work, and they have a perspective that I don't understand, and they give me the time and the resources to help me work through my own problems. Like, that's the view of Christianity that I have, is that God so loves us. If he really made the world, he wants us to know how the world works. And though there's still problems in the world, he wants us to come to him in understanding that. So yes, because I think of that with my children, right? I want my kids to make mistakes that are safe enough they can learn from them and not have like permanent scars, right? But there's a huge learning opportunity with making our own mistakes, right? But I'm going to give them certain boundaries so that those mistakes are, hey, you can make your decision here. I'm trying to help you think through this as well as possible. But then when they really come to me, they're like, I'm actually going to listen to my dad more. And yet, there still might be a time I disagree with him, but I know he wants what's best for me, and he's trying to help me make good decisions and all that. So, I think your acknowledgement is right on, because when I think, when I just follow my gut, I can be wrong a lot and I can be right a lot, but being open to learning regardless. And again, how do I even evaluate when I was wrong? What does it have to do to me? What does it have to do to other people? What's the outcome that I then determine that was a wrong decision? I'm not going to do that again. Um, and so if we're trying to shape that and create that ourselves, sometimes we can even miss out on some other things. I know I found, I'm 41 years old, been married for 14 years. I have 3 boys. My oldest is 10 years old. So I've been a dad for 10 years. I'm helping other young humans make good decisions. I've realized I still don't know a lot. And I'm still trying to get good input from certain people. I'm still trying to learn how to love the right things in the right order so that I can help my sons love the right things in the right order. But that's my perspective on that.
right? Uh, but do you think that your faith has answers for everything that you have dealt with in life?
No, I still have big questions about things. I think it's given me the most compelling answers to the most essential questions. Again, the most essential questions for where did we come from? Why are we valuable? Why do we value love? Why should we care about other people? So even the scientific questions that might seem to conflict, our modern view of science actually was again founded by a lot of Christian thinkers saying the world is orderly and can be known because it's made by an orderly and a God who wants to be known. So people like Isaac Newton, failing to think of anyone else, but they were self-professing Christians. Even Galileo Galilei didn't leave his Christian faith after being rejected by the church, the Catholic Church at the time. But those were Christian men who wanted to understand the world. So I want to understand big things. I'm not afraid of science. I'm not afraid of philosophy. I'm not afraid of theology and all those things working together, because whether we acknowledge it or not, again, so much of our life is based on beliefs, unprovable assumptions about the way the world should work, about the problems of the world. Now, we should be able to agree about some of the problems. We might not all agree about the solutions to those problems, but they're not just material problems, right? So, for instance, the West, very, we're first world people. We joke about first world problems, and we're being, I can't think of a better word, terrorized by mental health problems, depression and suicide. But we have all of our physical needs met. We have more access to the greatest, the longest, and most happiest life we can. But it just goes to prove it's not just our physical health that matters. It is a mental and I would say a spiritual existence that needs to be addressed as well. So that was I have lots of questions. I've got big questions about things, but I am compelled by the Christian worldview and its answers to some of these essential questions about identity and how we should use our freedom. Where do we get hope in the midst of disappointment? What about morality and justice? I think Christianity gives a really compelling answer to those things, because again, that fits with the human rights stuff. Meaning and satisfaction, the things that actually make life meaningful, connect to our loving relationships, the things that make us feel most fulfilled and satisfied are connecting to loving relationships. And that all fits within my understanding of the Christian worldview. But I respect a lot of things that I learned from my Hindu friends, my Buddhist friends, Eastern idea. And I think there's a lot of overlap there. And I think even my Muslim friends, I learn a lot from their honor and submission to Allah. So I want to learn from that. Only an atheist has to dismiss all of those things, right? A Christian could say, no, there's actually some truth to these other things. We disagree about their view of Jesus, right? Jesus is kind of the line in the sand for a Christian. But other than that, I respect a lot of what those religions have to say. I don't think they believe the same things as Christianity, and that's okay. I can still be friends, and yet I still have questions, big questions about life. So it hasn't answered all my questions.
Cool. Yeah, I think one thing that you said was that first world is being terrorized by mental health problems. I've lived in India, which is it's kind of first world, but it's still considered third world. I don't know why.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
still, I think it's more first world than any other country that I've ever been to. So my opinion is that mental health problems exist everywhere. They're just undiagnosed in those countries because of less awareness.
Interesting.
Just people are like, oh, I'm not depressed, I'm just constantly sad, because they don't know that there is depression, or they don't just feel it's important to go to a psychologist, sit in front of them, and be like, hey, tell me what's wrong with them, and they coming up with certain, words that, oh, it could be this, it could be that. And I think that's more prevalent in America.
One of the distinctions, like, what's a question that we could diagnose the differences? Because that's a really great comparison. But for instance, it's not just the rate of depression, but what about the rate of suicide? right?
Mm.
Is that higher or lower in these other countries? We'd say our first world because of their technological advances and some of their metropolitan areas. Um,
I
or
think the highest suicide rate is in Japan, and that's just a
wow,
cultural thing. Because in Japan, suicide is more honorable than leading a dishonorable life.
yeah,
So
that
it's just,
honor shame culture. Yeah,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I think for some reason that's considered honorable, which it's not. I think suicide is just terrible. But do you
Yeah.
have some other statistics that I do
No,
not
I
know?
was just thinking to myself, I was like, you might be right. Again, if we think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people that are really concerned about their day-to-day needs or even going another step up might not have time to occupy about, I wonder about the meaning of life. Some people might not go there and or might not think, oh, I have all of my physical needs met, but I don't feel like I can become the person I want to be. And so I don't have time to think about the depression there. I don't know. I think you and I have actually talked about this before, Avik. I think some of that is because of the comparison in the Western societies because of social media um, being a place that we could say, hey, man, I got this really cool gift or opportunity for blah, blah, blah. But then I see someone else post about their opportunity or about their gift or about their car or about their marriage or dating relationship, whatever it looks like. And I'm like, I never feel happy because I'm dealing with the photoshopped impression of that person's life, right? And I remember you kind of pushing back on that a little bit, but I think comparison has more influence, is more detrimental to our society than we might put on. Um,
It could be.
yeah,
It could be more harmful than probably I realize it to be. I just look at social media as an opportunity to, well, I use it as a dating tool. I'm single, so that's a
get it.
yeah, that's what I use it as because that's a way for me to describe myself for someone who doesn't know me. They go look at my Instagram and be like, okay, he does these things, he like these things. It's like it's like a advertisement for your life,
That's right. Yeah, it
which
is. Right.
it solves its purpose.
That's
Who's to
right.
say that's the wrong thing? Uh, but there is some damage being done out there, and I mean that's just the opinion that people have of me based on not living with me and having, of course, living in India and looking at my social media profile, they'd be
Mm,
like, yeah, this guy is just living the best life ever. And, I tell them, bro, I don't feel like that in
yeah.
myself. I,
Right.
the struggles that I'm going through are great. And, I just can't express them on the social media because I don't know how to express them on social media, right?
No,
Yeah,
that's
I
an
do go
interesting
through
point.
struggles.
Yep.
I yeah, relationships not working out, right? I
Yeah.
can't go on and be like, hey, listen, this girl did not choose me, and I'm
Right.
heartbroken.
Yeah.
Who's gonna want to read that? And I
Yeah.
hate the fact that I don't want to collect sympathies because I hate that more than anything else. Because
Yeah.
I don't like people that coming up to me and telling me, hey man, we feel bad for you because it makes me feel at a position where I'm not. I mean, it's just an ego thing where I'm not in a good position, and I always like to think that I'm still in a good position, even if bad things are happening to me or good
Yeah.
things are happening to me. But yeah, that there is some damage because to anyone listening to me right now, I'm not having a great life as my social media would indicate.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
That is just one aspect of our life. It doesn't show it all. That's right.
Cool. So I want to go on to a couple of more questions because we
Okay.
are running out of time. So you said that you went into your master's in theology because you
Mhm.
had questions about the world, right?
Yeah.
So what, and this was one of the questions that you mentioned. Why are we in this world? So
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
did you find out about why
Hey,
are we here, man?
The Christian perspective is compelling to me about this idea that the meaning of life is to know God's love and experience God's love, and then be a conduit of his love to those around you in loving relationships, right? So the two greatest commandments, Jesus simplified, summarized of all of the Jewish and Hebrew text. He said, the Hebrew Bible, he goes, the greatest two commandments are to love God with your whole being, with your heart, mind, soul, and strength. That means every part of you to love God the most. And the second commandment is to like it, is to love others as yourself. And though those are two really simple commands, they are two impossible commands to actually keep. So the Jewish law had like 600 commandments, and Jesus summarized it in two. All those commandments were telling people how to live in relationship with God and how to live in relationship with each other. And yet, to summarize 600 commandments into two didn't make it easier to keep the commandments. It actually made it even more difficult. It just showed us to love God the way we're supposed to is impossible, and to love people the way we're supposed to is impossible. The only way we do that is if we see God's love for us that we didn't deserve, right? The love we didn't deserve, God gave us. And Jesus proves that in the way that he came to earth to put on human flesh, to stoop to human existence, and to face the sacrifice, the penalty, the punishment of the cross that he didn't deserve, so that we didn't have to face the penalty that we deserve. So again, an existence for love, an existence, a meaning of life, all connected with the love of God and the love of others. That is just really compelling to me. I talked to one of my other friends at another co-working location, and he grew up, I think his parents were Catholic, and yet he's really resonated with a lot of the Buddhist teaching about peace and about the inner peace he can find. And again, the things that I wrestle with the Buddhist perspective is that it says peace is the greatest value to pursue. And yet sometimes it costs you relationships because you have to detach yourself in ways. That's at least the way I understand it. You and I have had some conversation about that too. Christianity says love is the greatest value. And through love, you can find peace as well. But if you pursue peace, you might not get love. Pursuing love, you get peace, and the other promises of Christianity is like love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness, gentleness and self-control, knowing that our desires can lead us in all kinds of places. But I find that really compelling. So the meaning of life in the Christian worldview is really that. It's to know and love God, and then in response to that, to love him because of his love for us. And that leads to more loving relationships, even when relationships disappoint us, when plans don't work out, when we face suffering. All that is included with the concept of a loving God who, no matter what happens on this earth, invites us to live with him in a loving relationship forever. Not just him, but all those who love him through belief in Jesus would get to live in heaven as well. So these loving relationships on earth get to continue for all eternity as well. That's at least the promise and the claim of Christianity. Now, Jesus does something unique when he steps on the planet and actually lived in human history, and his claims to be God. So we can look at human history to see if his claims are real, and we can wrestle and have a good conversation about that. But I can't think of another view of the world that's more compelling than love, and the concept of God as a loving father who sent his son. Like, a loving father only makes sense if what Jesus said was true. So I keep going back to that. And when I have other questions about the Bible or other things, I just go back to what Jesus had to say, and I go back specifically to the claims of his resurrection. I know that sounds crazy, but if he didn't come back from the dead, I shouldn't believe anything that he had to say. But if he didn't come back from the dead, you have to come up with an alternative explanation for why Christianity got started. Why Christians, the earliest disciples of Jesus, would claim Jesus came back from the dead in the same city he was just executed. That was within weeks of his execution. Why would they go in there? So there's lots of other things that come to mind, but I go to those things like the resurrection. I go to the concepts of the claims of Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, and I'm really compelled by that. I mean,
Right.
people still want to get their hands on Jesus.
But I mean, love is a great idea, and I prescribe to it too. Um, However, our modern society is not based on love. Let's just be real. Capitalism is not based on love at all. If the organizations would start running on the basis of love alone, the economy would collapse.
Mm-hmm.
So we do find ourselves in a situation where, well, in a society where, our existence cannot just thrive just on the basis of love. Would you agree?
Well, I love the way you do that, Avik. You're doing a great job hosting this, by the way, right? You making a strong statement that might even disagree with what I was saying, and then going, hey, do you agree or do you disagree with that? So get this. The concept of love is just not some lovey-dovey thing where we don't do anything good. Again, the idea of love is that we do good for others, even when it costs us something. So the whole view of a free market, right? Capitalism, and capitalism can have its bad connotations because of, I think, governmental interventions there. But when there's a free market exchange of goods and services, that I say, I can produce this that is valuable for my neighbor, and then my neighbor will give me either a currency or another product or service as well that I find valuable, and we freely exchange currency or goods or values for that in some sort of bargaining way, that does create an economy. And that means, hey, there has to be a trustworthiness of these people, and a fairness to that, and a shared view of what is good and what is valuable in those things. But if you and I didn't have a currency to deal with, but we had some things that each other wanted, you and I, because of our friendship, would come to an agreement because we wouldn't want to take advantage of each other, and we'd work that out freely. But if the government gets involved with that too much, some of us can feel compelled in that way. So what I'm saying is, even our economy is based on a view of human dignity and property rights and fairness, that I think does come from a view of how do I love my neighbor? I think it does. And I actually am the Acton Institute, which I quote from them a lot in our Conversation Matters, because I think they've done some really good thinking on economic issues, poverty issues, societal issues. They are a Catholic think tank. I'm not Catholic, but they just have a long history of trying to deal with these problems. And I think they think very well about it. And so they've made some really good arguments about how the economy happens best from a biblical worldview as well, which is based on this whole concept of love. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with a lot of things that you said, that in this exchange of goods and ideas and services, if everyone's acting in the fairest way and giving their most honest work, or presenting their honest work, then that's how the market is successful. I do agree with that. However, I mean, a lot of the corporations out there do profit on other corporations getting out of business, and there's absolutely no love there. But that's profiteering. And
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. So I'm not saying our entire economy works that way, but I'm saying the start of it was based on this idea of individuals' rights and property rights, intellectual property rights, and doing what is good for another person, right? A company can't stay in existence if it's not creating a good for someone that they find valuable enough to exchange in some way, something else valuable, right? So even that, in a sense, comes from the idea of Now, again, that's where it becomes, it goes back to that utilitarian idea and altruism idea of saying, I'm going to do good for someone else just so I get something back, right? In the economic exchange, if we're doing that freely, no one's under compulsion to buy or to sell, then there's a way to do that in a really loving way. All that to say, there's lots of problems with our current state of economies. And yet you do find, even within our culture, people are saying big corporations should be giving back to the community. Now, that doesn't financially benefit them, except in their publicity of things. They want to be publicly known as a likable company. So they will do these things, they'll fund these nonprofits, they'll be a part of these efforts. Now that is, again, that's been influenced by a societal pressure. Some of that, I think, goes too far, and especially in the way that they cancel certain things and cancel disagreement. But overall, all I'm saying is the concept of doing good for others is definitely influencing our economy.
Cool. So a lot of the Wall Street banks definitely are not Christian for sure, because that's not the basis of their operations, but they still find success. So let's talk about success in life right now.
Okay.
How do you define someone who's lived a successful life, or who wants to live a successful life?
That's a good point. I think the main thing I would want to address is making sure we don't equate success with material gain alone. Because if we made material gain the main factor in success, someone could be super wealthy in all the factors you'd want to include, and yet at the end of their life have no one that really cares for them and loves them, right? Do I think that is a successful life? No. Do I think someone who has a lot of people around them when they died somehow lead a successful life? Not necessarily, right? Depends on why all those people are still around them, right? Because a really wealthy person could love to give a lot of their money away so that they have people that love and care for them. And so at the end of their deathbed, they might be basically creating a theatrical end of their life by giving a lot of money away to people who are sycophants, right? So I don't necessarily think that's the right motivation either, but I think because here's the thing, I think someone could die on their own and die destitute without money and still live a successful life. The example I'd give to that is someone who has been wrongly accused of something and they die in prison, but they've given their life to something that was really good for other people, right? To love others when they didn't deserve it, and even when it costs them greatly, right? I'm trying to think of some specifics. Oh, well, I did not mean, Jesus is a perfect example. Jesus did not have anything at the end of his life, and he died a scandalous, most painful, horrific death that the Romans created, the crucifixion. And I think his life was successful in the ways that I would define that are he was lovingly obedient to God and lovingly obedient to share God's love with others, specifically through his teachings love. So I think the Christian view there, just like the Christian view of meaning, is to know and love God through Jesus and to share his love with others. So to love him and to love others. I think the success rate metric from the Christian worldview connects with that directly. How have I lived out of love of God and love for my neighbor? So the end of life could look very different for a faithful and successful Christian who came from much and ended with little, or came from little and ended with a lot. It's more, how have we spent our life, right? Think about that. When the Bible talks about material wealth, it uses the Greek word bios, which is where we get the word biology. So it says if you see someone in need and you don't give them bios, you're not actually loving them. So meaning you give them material wealth. If you can't share your material wealth, which means that bios idea is like, I'm giving a part of myself to that person, then we're not really loving them. And so the idea of loving with all of my life, all of my resources, it costs me everything. Now I have to be wise in that. I don't say yes to just anyone, just like my boys. They're like, hey, yeah, I want to have ice cream every day of the week, and I want to go to the store and get every toy that I want. Well, I know that that's not going to fulfill them. And I know we don't have money to do that all the time. So I've got to be a good steward of the resources we have to take care of our needs, to even have fun, but then to be a blessing to those around me. So, we love having parties at our house. I love a party, but I love the people that show up to the party, right? I'd love to get those people together and tell them, you're a blessing in my life. I love you. Let's hang out. Let's be together. Let's enjoy some time together. Let me introduce you to some more friends in my life. So I don't know. I hope that I'm living a life that's going to be seen as successful to my boys and the people around me that know and love me. They would say, Caleb lived a good life. By that, I'd say a loving life. So success, I would say, for me, is connected directly to what is good. And what is good is connected to what is loving.
Great answer, man. Yeah, and it's interesting to think about what success is. And I ask all of my people who come to my guests on my podcast about what they think success is. And I love listening to all these different kind of answers, because you were thinking about, the person who did not, at his death, would not have felt as successful. I have a couple of examples, like Nikola Tesla. He died broke in a hotel. All of his theories were not published by then, and now he's a successful man after his death. But when he died, he might have thought, man, I couldn't make a difference, which is interesting. Also, Vincent van Gogh, the famous artist, he killed himself because his paintings were worth nothing, and all his work became famous after his death.
After his death.
Which is interesting, do you think they were successful in their life or not? Because if you ask them when they were dying, are you successful? They would have been like, no. But now they are. So success is interesting.
It is interesting. So, even those historical examples, right? To think what was successful after they died was how valuable their work was financially, right? Or how much it produced. But to ask those other questions about their life, how did their closest relationships think about them? Did they think this person loved them or cared about others? Were they pursuing some career goal? Like Van Gogh, was he wanting to be a famous guy through his artistry? Or did he think, I have to paint? And when I paint, I see the joy of those around me. And even though I might not be getting the critical accolades or the financial things, I know it's a blessing to other people because of the goodness that it brings out, right? I think that way someone could die destitute and still go, I felt like I was a success, because again, they see the way that their life impacted other people for good. But it does break my heart, Van Gogh specifically, right? Because he literally killed himself. He was the one that felt like his life was a failure. And I'm saddened by that.
Yeah, it is. I guess the love that they had in their life was towards their art or trade or profession. They were just in love with the pursuit of the art so much that they did not have time for relationships. And we do see a lot of people like that. Steve Jobs is a great example. He was not successful in his personal life, but he's successful as seen by everyone. So I guess the love that you're talking about, it could be towards people or towards
things, accomplishments. I think there's some failures in that from my perspective, if it's only towards accomplishments, right? And those are the right there, we're trying to create some categories of where we define success. It's not just material, like financial, but it's just accomplishments could be part of that too, which a lot of times those correlate, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I wouldn't say exactly accomplishments,
mhm,
love for accomplishments, but I would think love for the trade or the art or just
mhm,
the whole path. Because
yeah,
all these people, they did not. I mean, if you are gonna accomplish something, you're gonna have to encounter consistent failures when
yeah,
you're trying to accomplish that thing.
yeah,
So you'd have to love the failures as much as you want to love the accomplishments. And it's just, how to
yeah,
say, the journey is bigger than the final destination sometimes,
yeah.
which
That's
is,
mhm,
yeah, which is my perspective on that.
mhm, mhm,
Cool. Finally, my last question for you, for Caleb, is you were talking about mental health issues.
yeah,
Um, and we do have physical illnesses these days,
mhm,
like diabetes, that the first world has a lot of issues with,
yeah.
cancer. Um, so what, according to you, is a path of life, or what someone who wants to stay away from these things, these mental health issues, these
Mhm.
physical health issues, and want to live a life which is, yeah, I mean, you can't ignore everything or avoid everything, but what is the best way to go about living life so that, they can live in a healthy, balanced manner?
Yeah, good point. Good question. Healthy and balanced, right? That's part of the questions I like discussing in our conversation matters, is trying to help people wrestle with what do we mean by healthy? What do we mean by balanced, right? Um, so like, is work just something we have to do so that we can then spend our time and money on the things that make us happy? Or can we find work that we really enjoy doing that's actually good for other people, right? There's a, again, I keep going back to my faith, but this is a place that I can be really transparent about where I'm coming from. Since you're asking this question personally, the Christian worldview about work is that we're made to work. God made humans in his image to be fruitful, to multiply, to steward the earth that he created. So we should care about the environment, we should care about others, and we should do good work, right? To cultivate what God has made for us to enjoy and for others to enjoy. And so this balance idea, I think our society definitely thinks I'm only working for the weekend. I'm only working for the after hours time. I'm only working so I can sustain a life that allows me to do the other things I like doing. Well, I've been asking myself this question lately. What if I just became an inheritor of a great estate and I didn't have to work for a living anymore? How would I spend my time? And I was convicted because I'm like, how much of that time would just be spent on what I want to do just for me? And then I see some people that are very wealthy that I'm connected to in my life, that some of them are mentors. And I see the way that they've used their time when they don't have to work. And I'm like, that is excellent. They are really good at what they do. They are connecting and benefiting other people, and they are finding themselves using time and resources to benefit others, to solve problems still, to care and love for others. So I guess I'm trying to reject the idea of the work life balance because I don't think those should be bifurcated as much. And I get it. Some jobs are just so tedious that we don't feel like we're actually alive in ourselves in those things. And I think there needs to be some strong, specific evaluations of if that's the job you should be in. Oftentimes we stay in those jobs because they give us the financial means to do the other things. And if you're willing to do that, there's nothing bad there. I know lots of families who have made that work. Um, I have a friend who is my wife's doctor, and she is an OBGYN. She delivered all three of our boys, and she was one of the first chief residents at a hospital in Dallas, and might have been one of the first in the whole country that was a female chief resident. Um, or chief physician. I can't remember the exact title, but basically the head physician. Um, well, she would get home late at night because of all of her responsibilities, and she had young kids at home, and so they would have dinner at like 9 o'clock at night, which just seems really weird. We're all in bed by like 8:30 at our house, but they made their family work because she was really awesome at what she did. We know firsthand because she delivered all three of my boys, and it's incredible. But also, she was good at what she did, and her family worked it out to say, this is how we're still going to commit to family time together. We're going to have dinner at 9 o'clock at night. And they just shuffled their schedule to make that work, which was pretty incredible for me to see and to witness. There's other friends that have done things similar to that in other industries. But the whole idea is seeing people find the things that they're really good at and still commit to loving relationships is a big deal for me. So finding the life that they want, to move down the path that they want. I think there's lots of other questions someone has to wrestle with. What is good work? And then what are the things that I do best, right? There's tons of books on this idea too, right? What can I do well? What does the world need? And what's the other one? What can I get paid for, right? What do I like doing and I'm good at? What does the world need? And what can I get paid for in the sense? And you're trying to look for those overlapping sections there. There's another diagram with that too, but I think that one's from Good to Great. So I've had to learn who I am, what I'm good at, how I can bring value in certain situations, how my education, how my experience, how my network of relationships and the needs around me all play into that factor. But I'm looking through the lens of how do I love in all those situations? How do I bring my best in doing what is good in my most immediate sphere of influence, and then to think beyond that if I could be used in any bigger capacity there. I think I trailed off from your question though.
I think
You
it's
want to rephrase
it's a
it?
part of it. I asked how do you find balance in life, but also how do you live a healthy life. So I think you answered the balanced question about, what's the right balance to find in life. So how do you live a healthy life?
There you go. So again, healthy life, what does that look like? So the examples I just gave, it's because I was thinking of healthy life to me includes loving, committed relationships. It includes providing what's good for my family and for those around me. So it means I have to work, right? And I have to work in a way that can provide enough income that I can take care of my family. And I want to be a blessing to others. So I don't just want to meet my needs. I want to be a blessing to others when they don't deserve it financially in those ways. So you're thinking of healthy in the sense of how do relationships fit into that? What kind of work am I doing? How am I spending my time and my energy? And all of that as I consider my responsibility as a husband, as a father, as a neighbor, as a friend. And then, thinking about the things that I'm good at doing, that I have energy for, and can bring in some income. So that's a big, broad question for me, but I think I've shared enough of what I get to do to think. Don't discount relationships in the midst of what you're thinking, and don't make work the end all be all as well.
Yeah, that's hard to do, honestly. So, and this question just came to me, and I because I'm pretty interested in how you deal with this thing. So I'm sure that everyone in life experiences failure at one point or another, professionally, personally, uh, or things don't go according to plan, wherever it may be. So how have you dealt with your failures, and
Yeah,
what have you learned from them, and how would you advise people to deal with their failures?
really good question. I think we're not honest if we don't say we failed in some sort of way. Again, I'm going back to my faith perspective in Christianity, says that all of us are failures in one major way, that none of us loved God the way we were made to. And that's the whole concept of sin, that we loved ourselves, we loved other things more than we loved God. And so all of us are a failure in that way. When I think of my personal failures of doing some really ugly things to my wife, saying things, hurting her in certain ways that I'm ashamed of, um, failing in certain job situations or projects that I was working on, um, not accomplishing some things, or being at a place that I feel like I should be as a 41-year-old man financially, or whatever that might look like. I can get pretty frustrated and disappointed in myself. So what do I do in those moments? Well, in the personal failure part, like with my wife, I'm so grateful for her forgiveness. Like she doesn't owe me her forgiveness. I can't even earn her forgiveness, but she has chosen to forgive me, again, from her Christian faith of God's forgiveness for her leads her to forgive me when I don't deserve it. Um, so in those failure situations, it's having loving relationships that are willing to forgive you when, and even willing to confront you when we don't recognize our failures. Uh, Man, to be confronted and to go, wow, I didn't realize I hurt you in that way. That's a big deal too. And to have someone love me enough to do that. But then when I acknowledge it and I apologize, that I know forgiveness will be there. So in my disappointment, personal relationship with my wife, that forgiveness is a big idea. My idea of being a failure in life in general, that God's forgiveness is there for me. Um, the idea of certain setbacks or decisions that didn't play out the way I thought they would, or wouldn't be somewhere. I can let some of those things go a little too far for me. So I just say, I just start to list the things that I'm grateful for and how God has provided in those situations. And I look to the big picture. Again, everyone has a worldview that tells them how the world should work, and tells them how they should deal with their disappointments. If this life is all there is, well, I'd be desperate to find immediate happiness and immediate satisfaction, or to get to that thing at the end of my life. I would only sacrifice immediate happiness for greater happiness later in life. And sometimes we can do that. And the closer we get to that greater happiness we've been promising ourselves, and we're like, that didn't satisfy me the way I hoped it would, right? But I think enriching ourselves with loving relationships, doing what's good for them, investing your life. Honestly, good managers and business leaders and owners are people that really care about their people and care about creating a good product for good people. So even if you're not a Christian in that perspective, I think that view of life can really help you go a long way. But ultimately, if I don't accomplish the things I want to, if a pandemic gets in the way of me getting to some other accomplishment that I want, what am I going to do in the midst of disappointment? And I think Christianity's concept of hope really is, again, compelling to me. The idea that even in the midst of suffering and disappointment, I can learn something. It forces me to reach out beyond myself, right? I'm not in control of my situation as much as I think I am. Do I acknowledge God in that moment? And if I acknowledge God more, and if I'm praying to God more, if I'm more thankful, then I can be more in the moment, thinking about God's loving purposes for me and for others. So I don't have to be all self-focused when things are disappointing. I can actually be a blessing even when I'm disappointed or fearful in that moment. But ultimately, life is going to end for all of us. I think that the joke is, the statistics say that all of us are going to die, right? 100%. So what do we think about that? What do we think about when life ends? Will we think that all that was worth it? The Christian hope is that all the best things in this life is just a glimpse of what life with God forever and his people forever. So I don't think that's just pie in the sky wishful thinking, because again, if Jesus really he did come in human history, but if his claims are real and he did come back from the dead, then that means life after death, we can have a lot more hope in the midst of all that stuff. So disappointment, pain, struggle, Christian worldview tells me I should expect that. I should expect suffering. because the world is not the way it's supposed to be. The world is in chaotic living. Everyone's trying to be their own king. And when kings collide, right, we fight about things. We're fighting for our own, whatever that is, our own whatever, respect, our own power, our own happiness, and those things. And we bump up against other kings or would-be kings. But if Jesus is the king, oh, I don't have to fight to be king anymore. And he's the wise one who understands things. And so I'm just going to find myself following his loving guidance for my life more. I don't actually have to push, and I don't have to experience every failure. I can actually avoid some of the failures because I'm listening to this person who genuinely loves me and wants what's best for me. And he wants what's best for the people around me. And sometimes what's best for me is for me not to get what I want, for me to realize the difficult things actually make me more grateful, thankful, and loving. And then ultimately at the end of this life, there's something really hopeful where it's an undiminished existence. This world, it's any loving and joyful experience is a clouded and tainted view of the best things to come. That's at least what Christianity promises. So I look at every perspective like that, and there are some hard things: loss of loved ones, chronic pain, the pandemic itself. I mean, the existential dread that we all felt there. Christians looked at that from the view of the Christian hope. Other people looked at those problems from their own view of hope. That didn't mean Christians just sat on the sidelines. We were looking to love our neighbors well, to use science and use medical technologies to do the best we could to love our neighbors. But things are outside of our control more than we will want to admit. And God's love for us is what helps me get through that.
Cool. Sometimes what's best for us is not to get what we want. Well said, Caleb. And I'd like to end this podcast on that note. Thank you for joining me. It was lovely to have you.
It was an honor, Avik. Thank you, friend.
One last thing. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
I don't have a lot of content that I'm creating ongoing other than the discussion forum content. So collaborategood.org is a place where they can see some of our past conversation matters topics and where we are, what locations we're serving in the DFW Metroplex. So collaborategood.org and /conversation matters is where they can find specifically the content about our topics and discussion forums.
All right.
Okay, friend.
Thank you. And let's end at that note.
Thank you.